As World War II drew to a close with Germany's surrender, the horrors of Nazi concentration camps came into sharp focus. Guards, wardens, and commanders of these death camps scrambled to escape justice, forging new identities or fleeing in desperation. Few succeeded, and even fewer survived the trials that followed. But in the chaotic moments of liberation, it wasn't just courts that delivered justice. It was the prisoners themselves, fueled by years of unimaginable suffering. Dachau concentration camp, the spark of vengeance. When American troops of the 45th Infantry Division led by Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks rolled into Dachau on April 29, 1945, they were met with a surreal sight. SS guards, rather than scattering, lined up to greet them, expecting to negotiate surrender. What they didn't account for was the rage ignited by the scenes the soldiers witnessed. Piles of corpses, some half-burned, others rotting, and thousands of prisoners reduced to skeletal figures. This sparked what history now calls the Dachau massacre. The camp's commandant, SS Untersturmführer Heinrich Wicker, stepped forward to discuss terms. Before he could finish, an American soldier charged forward and shot him point-blank in the eye. That single gunshot was like a match to dry tinder. The prisoners, emboldened, unleashed their fury. Armed with bare hands, shovels and picks, or even pistols slipped to them by soldiers, they attacked the guards. American officers turned a blind eye, some even quietly encouraging the retribution. About 70 SS guards were herded toward the coal yard. Several didn't make it that far, beaten or killed en route. When Colonel Sparks stepped aside, a machine gunner opened fire, cutting down 17 guards in seconds. As the gunner was replaced, prisoners swarmed in, wielding shovels and anything they could grab, killing around 40 SS men in a frenzy of vengeance. For a single day, Dachau became a crucible of retribution, with senior officers conveniently absent to avoid charges of war crimes. Later, roughly 60 more Nazis were lined up against a wall and shot by American firing squads, with photographs capturing a lieutenant overseeing the executions. Even the wounded SS in the camp hospital weren't spared, dragged out and shot, totaling around 346 executions, including Hungarian personnel. No medical aid was given to the wounded. Soldiers and prisoners alike watched the Nazis' final agonies without a shred of sympathy. In all, about 560 camp personnel, including hospital staff, met their end. That first night, the prisoners turned on the capos, fellow inmates who had collaborated with the Nazis. Around 300 were brutally executed, strangled, beaten or hanged, their betrayal repaid in blood. Buchenwald concentration camp, the uprising's wrath. Buchenwald's liberation was driven by the prisoners themselves, led by Soviet POWs in a daring uprising. On April 11, 1945, Buchenwald prisoners stormed the watchtower and seized control of the camp, with armed prisoners occupying the camp gate and overpowering the remaining SS men. The guards who survived the initial revolt faced a worse fate. The resistance at Buchenwald was led by what was known as the International Underground Committee, composed primarily of German communist political prisoners, along with French, Polish, Czech, and Soviet prisoners of war. These experienced political activists had managed to maintain communication networks within the camp, organize mutual aid and survival assistance, prepare for the opportunity to take control when SS forces weakened, coordinate with approaching Allied forces. As US troops approached, the prisoners unleashed their vengeance. Guards were beaten, locked in punishment cells, forced to kneel for hours, or torn apart by enraged crowds. Hanging, considered the most merciful end, was rare. Most were simply pummeled to death. Neither the uprising's leaders nor the arriving Americans showed any pity for the perpetrators of one of the most barbaric camps in history. Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, a slow, grim reckoning. When British forces liberated Bergen-Belsen, they took a different approach. The 80 captured guards were forced to bury the thousands of dead prisoners, hauling decomposing bodies to mass graves without gloves or masks. Typhus claimed about 20 of them within days, a fitting irony for those who had presided over such misery. While less documented, survivors' diaries paint a chilling picture. prisoners exacted brutal revenge, burning guards alive, hacking them to pieces, or beating them to death on the very torture devices they once wielded. The only mercy shown was that no guards were torn apart by dogs, though the guard dogs themselves were shot or beaten without hesitation by troops and prisoners alike. Ohrdruf concentration camp. Justice before liberation. At Ohrdruf, the guards never saw the US 4th Tank Division arrive. On April 2, 1945, the majority of the prisoners had already been sent on the so-called Death March to other camps, most of whom perished. But those who remained in Ohrdruf were determined to take action against their former captors. With the arrival of the American soldiers, many of the guards who were either trying to escape or surrender were captured by the prisoners. In a shocking display of vengeance, the surviving prisoners executed the SS personnel without mercy. Some guards were shot with weapons captured from the Nazis, others were lynched or beaten to death. The prisoners, having suffered unimaginable pain and loss, felt no sympathy for their captors. The cruelty and suffering they had endured at the hands of the SS guards had left them filled with anger and the need for justice, which they decided to take into their own hands. When General Patton and photojournalists arrived a week later, they found the camp scene to be a chilling reminder of the prisoners' wrath. Photographs from that time captured the gruesome aftermath of the prisoners' vengeance, showing the bodies of SS guards who had been dismembered, their heads crushed or shot point blank in their last moments. The pictures documented the result of a brutal, lawless form of retribution, with the prisoners having taken full control of their oppressors' fate. The psychology of liberation. To understand these events, we must consider the psychological state of all parties involved. The liberated prisoners had endured years of systematic dehumanization designed to strip them of dignity, hope, and basic human identity. The sudden reversal from complete powerlessness to the ability to determine their captor's fate created intense psychological pressure. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist who later wrote extensively about the psychology of survival, described the complex emotions that survivors experienced upon liberation. Alongside joy and relief came overwhelming rage, desire for revenge, and difficulty processing the sudden transition from victimhood to freedom. For many prisoners, the opportunity to take revenge represented not just personal satisfaction, but a restoration of agency that had been systematically denied to them. The act of determining a guard's fate, even if that fate was death, was a powerful psychological reclamation of human dignity and power. The American and British soldiers who liberated the camps faced their own psychological crisis. Many were young men from small towns and cities who had never encountered systematic genocide. The evidence of Nazi atrocities challenged their understanding of human nature and civilization itself. Military training had prepared them for combat, but not for processing the reality of industrial-scale murder. Many soldiers later described feeling that normal rules of warfare and justice seemed inadequate when confronted with evidence of such systematic evil. Military leaders at all levels struggled with how to respond to these incidents. On one hand, they recognized that allowing summary executions violated military law and the Geneva Convention. On the other hand, many felt that the guards deserved whatever fate awaited them, and that intervening to protect war criminals might demoralize their own troops and outrage the prisoners they had just liberated. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, had anticipated that liberation of the camps would create difficult situations. In planning documents from early 1945, he acknowledged that maintaining discipline might be challenging when soldiers confronted evidence of Nazi atrocities. The command response varied significantly between different units and different camps. Some officers intervened quickly to restore military discipline and ensure that captured guards were processed according to international law. Others chose to look the other way, either from moral conviction that the guards deserved their fate or from recognition that intervening might create additional problems. This inconsistency reflected the unprecedented nature of the situation. There was no playbook for liberating extermination camps, and military leaders were forced to make split-second decisions about complex moral and legal questions while dealing with the immediate humanitarian crisis of caring for tens of thousands of starving and diseased prisoners. Lessons and legacy. The liberation of Nazi concentration camps and the revenge killings that sometimes followed offer important lessons about human nature, justice, and the limits of civilization. They demonstrate how extreme circumstances can lead ordinary people to abandon normal moral and legal constraints, both for evil, as in the case of the guards, and for understandable if problematic revenge, as in the case of prisoners and some soldiers. These events also highlight the importance of maintaining legal and institutional frameworks for addressing mass atrocities. While the immediate emotional satisfaction of revenge killings is understandable, the longer-term process of establishing legal accountability through institutions like the Nuremberg trials ultimately proved more significant for establishing historical precedent and preventing future genocide. Perhaps most importantly, these incidents remind us that the consequences of systematic dehumanization extend far beyond the immediate victims. The Nazi concentration camp system damaged everyone it touched: prisoners, guards, liberators, and entire societies. The violence that occurred during liberation was, in many ways, a direct continuation of the violence that had defined the camps themselves. Understanding these events requires acknowledging both the understandable human desire for revenge and the importance of maintaining legal and moral frameworks even in extreme circumstances. It means recognizing that the line between victim and perpetrator can sometimes blur in complex ways, while never losing sight of the fundamental moral distinction between systematic genocide and responses to it.